is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 176, covering the week of July 1 through July 5th, 2019. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Abbeville Institute, like our Facebook page at Abbeville Institute, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube page at Abbeville Institute. If you don't want to search for all those things, just go to our webpage, abbevilleinstitute.org. At the top of the page, you'll see all our social media buttons. Click on those. It'll take you right out to our social media accounts. You can also support the Abbeville Institute by clicking on the Amazon button, the little Amazon smile button at the top of the page. That will make the Abbeville Institute your preferred nonprofit organization when you shop at Amazon. So everyone buys something at Amazon. You can throw a few pennies our way that way. You can also support the Institute by going to abbevilleinstitute.org. At the top of the page, you'll see a button that says support or a tab that says support. Click on that. It'll have a donor options tab, and it'll give you all the ways you can contribute to the Institute, whether it's monthly, annually, one-time donation. We also have planned giving, so if you're interested in estate planning, all of those things are available on our website. So please consider a tax-deductible donation to the Abbeville Institute. It does help keep the podcast going, the website going, all of our programs, all the things we're working on. So it is a great way to help us explore what is true and valuable in the Southern tradition. Under that tab, you'll also see a little button that says Shop. Click on that. You can get all your Abbeville Institute apparel. It's nice embroidered material. It's good stuff. You got golf shirts, T-shirts, hats, all kinds of great stuff. So you can support the Institute that way and also market for us because you can wear your apparel out and about in your community. So we've got all these great ways to support the Institute. Also, don't forget that if you're at our webpage, give us an email address and we'll give you a free ebook, and you get our daily dose of Dixie Monday through Friday and our weekly email on Saturday or Sunday. It's a great way to keep in touch with the Institute and a great way to see what we're doing on a regular basis. All right, well, let's talk about the material for the week. We had, I think, some interesting material this week, and one of the things I'll say about it, particularly the piece on Monday and the piece on Thursday, the piece on Thursday is a nice summary of the problems with the politically correct interpretation of the South and Confederate monuments. And it's written by Phil Lee. Of course, Phil Lee is going to be speaking at our summer school, so if you've made arrangements to go to our summer school, we have a great summer school set up for you, great program. I believe we're full at this point, but we will have eventually the lectures available online for you so you can watch those lectures. But he's going to be doing a talk about Confederate monuments there, the real reason Confederate monuments were erected. And in this particular piece, he talks about the imprisonment of political correctness. And what does he mean by that? And I think this is very important to understand. Political correctness is an ideology. And one of the things that Dr. Livingston has talked about, and we've talked about on this podcast and other places on the website, is that conservative is not really an ideology. And so when you use the term conservatism or you use the term tradition is not an ideology. We talk about exploring what is true and valuable in the Southern tradition. Tradition is not an ideology. Tradition is the known. Tradition is family, community, society, things that have gone on for generations. When we talk about things like the Southern tradition, or some people would say Western civilization, whatever the case may be, what they're actually talking about there is tradition. Now, Mel Bradford called it reactionary, and conservatives, quote unquote, have been called reactionaries because they react to the left attempting to bulldoze those traditions. I don't necessarily like that term reactionary because it makes you sound like a knee-jerk hothead. It's not that. I think what the best description of this is that the tradition is a fence, and I think Chesterton explained this very well. Tradition is a fence against the onslaught of barbarians trying to move onto your property, right? I mean, look, if you go back to Roman history, why did the Romans build a wall around Rome? Because they were sacked by the Celts, and so that wall and those gates kept people out. When Hannibal invaded Italy and tried to bring the Roman Empire at that point to its knees. It wasn't really even much of an empire at that point. It was still the Roman Republic. Tried to bring it to its knees. They resisted because they had a wall, and that wall protected those Roman traditions, that early Roman citizen. And so now a culture or a society doesn't build physical walls that you can see, but traditions serve as those walls. So as we talk about things that are going on, whether it's tearing down monuments, monuments are a symbolic wall. It's a symbolic wall against the reformist onslaught that's taking place in society. It's an expression of sorrow at the loss of individuals, as Phil Lee talks about. These things were put up at points in Southern history, whether it was 25 years, 50 years, 75 years, or 100 years, as people were beginning to remember the sacrifice that soldiers made. But it serves as a symbol of defiance. And I think that these monuments were clear about why they were erected. They were erected because they were in honor of the soldiers who died for the cause of federalism, of independence, of liberty. And the monuments say that. They don't say anything about race. And we already talked about Julian Carr, and Phil Lee wrote a nice little piece on that. They don't say anything about race. And those that imply, well, these things are all put up because of race, they're just complete idiots. I mean, there's no other way to describe them. Yes, Southerners in the early 20th century, into the mid-20th century, were racist. There was a lot of racists in the South. There was a lot of racists all over the United States. I can guarantee you the people that were putting up Union monuments in the same time period were also racists. So are we going to tear those down too? Now, if you look at the politically correct assault on everything in America, I think at some point, yes, those things will come under attack. And we know this because we saw just recently the Betsy Ross flag is now under attack on a shoe. You can't have that because it's offensive. And we had one Georgetown professor calling it just like putting up a swastika. I mean, you almost can't make up the stupidity and hysterical nature of these people on the left at times. So all of these things serve as a fence, as a hedge, a symbolic fence or a symbolic hedge, but not just that. Traditions do that as well. So the Southern tradition serves as a hedge against the onslaught of reform. And I know people will say, oh yeah, but it's all Southerners are ever worried about is race. Well, we know that's not true, because we can look at the things that people were talking about, the 12 Southerners were talking about, and I'll take my stand, which wasn't all about race. We can look at things that Dabney was talking about. It wasn't all about race. There was a fear, an abject fear, that the war was the beginning of a new revolution in America that was going to transform society in so many different ways. And that fear has been realized. So PC, as Lee talks about, is mental imprisonment. It's an ideology, and everything has to conform to that ideology. What we talk about here at the Abbeville Institute is not ideology. It's tradition. What traditions can we maintain, can we hold on to, that will preserve the good, preserve what is true and valuable in Southern society? Not every tradition has things, as I've said before, has thorns, right? Every tradition has thorns and things you would want to get rid of. But you don't want to cut down the entire bush because it's got the roses on the end too. And that's what we're trying to do here. And of course, monuments, these beautiful monuments, are the rose. They're the rose. They're not the thorns, they're the rose. And so by looking at the artwork, the message, the American character that's embodied in those monuments, heroism, patriotism, honor, loyalty, not treason, not hate, not those things, but those particular traits that are embodied in those monuments. Robert E. Lee was considered one of the greatest Americans in history by people north and south. Robert E. Lee was loved and admired. Dwight Eisenhower maintained a portrait of Robert Lee for 2 terms in the White House. Franklin Roosevelt made a wonderful speech in praise of Robert E. Lee essentially at the unveiling of a Confederate monument. It wasn't exactly at that time, but he talked about it. He said, look, here we got this beautiful monument here to one of the greatest Americans, Robert E. Lee. A great American, not just a great Southerner, but someone who embodied the Southern character, an American character. It's the same thing at the Alamo when William Barrett Travis wrote that what they were doing there was fighting for the American character. The principles of liberty and independence. That is the American character. And so the Southern tradition is, you could say it's reactionary in that it reacts to the onslaught of PC, but more than anything else, it's trying to put up fences, walls, traditional walls against reform that we don't even know what this reform is necessarily going to do. I mean, by nature, reform is destructive, and we don't know what's going to come out of that. It's been untried, untested, and who knows what the byproduct will be. I think we can see it. I think you can say, well, if you do this, you're probably going to have this, and a lot of this has been proven correct. So the Southern tradition serves as a model, an example of what we could do to stop, to arrest the destructive nature of the left. These monuments that are now, the left is tearing them down. That is pure destruction. These monuments serve as a reminder of the Southern tradition, the spirit, what used to be the American tradition, the spirit of independence, the spirit of self-determination. One, in Time magazine, one nitwit little writer, leftist writer, said they serve as dissidents, defiance. Well, they do. I mean, it's thumbing its nose at the central authority in that way. I mean, certainly. But who wants to go to, look, when people come to the South, do they want to go see everything that they see in the North? No, the South has a regional culture and a regional tradition, and people from all over the world want to see it. When you tear these things down, there's nothing left. What, do you go to Rome to marvel at the modern Italian government? No, you go to Rome to marvel at the ruins, at the monuments that are there for the Roman people. The Romans were a more brutal slaveholding class than the Southerners ever were. So we still go marvel at those things. We still go to Greece and Athens, which was also a slaveholding society, and marvel at the ruins there. Ooh, aren't these things beautiful? Aren't they wonderful? And you don't have to run around saying, let's talk about Athens in the 5th century BC, but first we must talk about slavery. Nobody does that. We don't go to Rome and say, let's talk about the Romans, let's talk about the Severn Arch. First we must talk about slavery. No, but if you go to the South, you go to a monument or a house or a building. Let's talk about this beautiful Greek revival architecture. But first, let's talk about the slaves that built it. No, we don't do that. We do that, but we don't do it anywhere else. This is how ridiculous the profession has become and historical interpretation has become in the United States. So I think this piece is, again, nice, concise. He's saying, look, this is a narrative that's been fabricated by the left. There's no evidence that these things were put up just to celebrate Jim Crow or racism or white supremacy. In fact, the evidence is in the opposite direction. But the SPLC and other groups, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all these left organizations have decided that they're going to push this narrative because they don't like him. And again, as I've said on this podcast now for years, we're at episode 176. I've probably said it in near 100 episodes. Confederate monuments are the low-hanging fruit. Southern symbols are the low-hanging fruit. Once that stuff is gone, the ultimate objective will turn to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. Of course, John C. Calhoun, Henry Clay. Calhoun's already under attack. Why not Henry Clay? Why not Abraham Lincoln? Of course, Abraham Lincoln had said horrible things about black Americans. Why not that? Why not that? It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Now, see, they've already pivoted in some ways because of monument protection laws and other things. You can paint over a mural of George Washington in San Francisco. You can perhaps take down a statue of Thomas Jefferson at Hofstra University. That's on private property, so you can do that. So we're just going to pivot to the things that we can take care of, clearly exposing their agenda, which is erase American history before 1975. This is why in my own McClanahan Academy, which I offer a class on Reconstruction, why I said, look, Reconstruction goes to 1975. In many ways, this is another form of Reconstruction, what we're going through now. But American history really can't start before then because you have all these unsavory characters. Maybe into the 1980s. In fact, in the late 70s. In fact, that brings up the piece on Monday with Joe Biden. Joe Biden took a lot of heat because Joe Biden on the campaign trail said, "Yeah, well, I used to work with people like Eastland of Mississippi and some of these other Southern senators because we got things done. I didn't like these guys. Essentially, look, in this particular case, Biden never praised these people other than that. Well, we got things done." Talmadge, Eastland, he brought up both of those senators by name. And of course, that created a situation where people said Biden should apologize. But Biden, to his own credit, didn't back down. He said, "No, Booker should apologize. I didn't do anything. I was simply saying in the Senate." And then, of course, in the debates, you had Biden lambasted by Kamala Harris. And Biden didn't really know how to react. In a way, you watch it and you think this is the party that Biden helped create. This is the party all these people helped create, so they deserve it. But not only that, but you can also feel sorry for Biden because it shows you how far left the Democrat Party has gone, and not just that, how far left in some ways the American political system has gone, and the electorate has gone, or at least a certain portion of the electorate has gone. Biden's running around trying to be a centrist. But should we, this is again the erasing of history. So because you had these unsavory characters, you can't even mention anything good these people did. Look, I'll never forget a few years ago, I was reading an article about how Eastland and others, Strom Thurmond, you had all these Democrats, Fulbright, all these people, that when they were in the Congress were all New Dealers. They were all supporting the New Deal. They're all kind of these big government progressives in a lot of ways. It's just that their views on race did not mesh with the 21st century sensibilities on it. So we have to say they're awful. Richard Russell, one of the most important men in American political history, Richard Russell of Georgia. But because he was a segregationist, we can't say anything positive about Richard Russell. Well, I think, that's just silly. But this is where we are. You can't say anything positive about somebody because they had a view that was not in line with 21st century America. So there was talk about renaming the Richard Russell Senate building. Well, that shouldn't happen. Richard Russell was the Senate at one point. It's just silly to have these particular views, but this is what we get in the 21st century with modern PC. So this piece by Houston Middleton, it's nicely written, and it gets into that. Joe Biden is facing a backlash because of the leftward reformist destructive nature of that part of that segment of that party now, and Biden is getting caught he's in the crosshairs now. They want to take out Biden because he represents an older, more centrist kind of order, and a man that would work with people that maybe he didn't agree with on every issue, but he would work with them. I don't think Biden was never a segregationist. And of course, he got hit for busing, and he said, look, I wasn't against, he said, the busing that you had for you was actually set up by your city. He said, I was against federal busing because it's illegal. And he's right about that. He said, I didn't want the Department of Education busing. The cities can do what they want. Biden was acting as having a real federalist position at that point. And he was perfectly right about the fact that busing was unconstitutional, according to the Constitution. It's not constitutional. He said the federal government shouldn't be involved in that. Biden held the correct legal position. But, of course, to those looking to strike political hit points, to those who want the shock moment to try to pump some money into a campaign that's not going anywhere, this is an opportunity. Oh, yeah, give it to old Uncle Joe there. And so we can raise money. Kamala Harris would get destroyed in the 2020 election. I think, honestly, Biden really is the only person that stands a chance to beat Trump out of all the Democrat nominees. But, that's if you look at that from an objective standpoint, I think that would be probably the closest race would be Biden and Trump. But I digress, because that's not the point. The point is that you have a situation where these Southern senators now are persona non grata, where Southern history is becoming completely alien to America. And if you mention it at all in any positive way, you are just lambasted. Which is why the Abbeville Institute exists, because we need this counterweight. We need the ability to say some things positive about the South, because the South actually is the portion of the United States that really does hold it all together. So that piece was good. And then you had the review on Tuesday on Roger Scruton's book on how to be a conservative, which I found interesting because Scruton's a Brit, so he's not talking about the South, but Nicole Williams, who wrote the review, had some interesting comparisons to Southern history and the Southern tradition with the book. The economic positions, socioeconomic matters, as she says. Scruton, echoing the 12 Southerners, and I'll take my stand, discusses the negative impact that urbanization, industrialization, and monetization have had upon the Anglosphere, particularly the United States. She says, while he is a clear supporter of free markets and rails against government interference, he believes that society itself is best placed to restrain the excesses of the market, not government. In fact, he states the central government interference has acted as an agent to remove these social restraints, and no government action will repair the damage wrought. And, of course, it's very critical of multinational corporations and what they do to communities and people, and how the environment's important. And she says, finally, Scruton discusses the importance of the environment, natural and the built environment in which we dwell. We have allowed for these areas to be destroyed and degraded. It is no wonder that our civic society follows suit. Repeating many of the themes touched upon by the Abbeville Institute, the place from which we come is important to our identity. And the book criticizes how these things are being torn apart through capitalism and government policy run amok. Underscoring all of this is a loss of faith in God, loss of community, and destruction of the civil order in which we all owe so much. So again, it's tradition. It's not ideology. And to say it's conservative, it's not really, the important part is how to follow tradition. Why does tradition matter? Why does tradition matter is the question. And, this is not to say that other traditions don't matter for other places. There is a northern tradition, and it matters for the North. There are things that people do in New Hampshire and Maine and Massachusetts that matter for those people there, or people in New York, or people in California. The whole point of federalism and the idea of a federal republic was that it could absorb those differences and everyone could get along in peace. But when you start to try to apply your worldview on everyone else, that creates conflict. So I like this piece. And then on Friday, we ran a piece, Conan the Southerner by Joel T. Leggett. We had never had anything by Joel Leggett before. He is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Marine Corps. And this is an interesting piece because it gets into the literature series, Conan. And it's mythology. Robert E. Howard wrote these books, and he says himself, Leggett says, according to Howard, Conan was, quote, a combination of a number of men I have known. In creating Conan, he, quote, took the dominant characteristics of various prize fighters, gunmen, bootleggers, oil field bullies, gamblers, and honest workmen, and combining them all produced the amalgamation I call Conan the Cimmerian. In short, Conan bears the unmistakable stamp of the environment in which Howard grew up, which was in Texas. These are heroic traditions in Texas. And I think that some of the best literature and films and things that have been created are based on the South. It's based on the South. You can't get around it. But that's it. A place matters. You can't write good literature. You can't make a good film without being attached to a place or a community. If you try, it's going to be garbage. It doesn't have a real story to it. There's a reason why Faulkner was able to do what he did with Mississippi, because that was a real place to him. And even though it was fictional, all was based on something real, something tangible he had seen or felt in his life or experienced. All that tangible stuff matters when you're writing a story. You have to have experience. The reason Southern music is so powerful, I don't care what type of Southern music it is, whether it's rock and roll, whether it's Southern rock, whether it's jazz, whether it's blues, whether it's country, rockabilly. We've had that wonderful presentation by Tom Daniel at our summer school. He pointed out all these different forms of American music are Southern, but they come from a place. The reason they produce what they do is because they come from a place. And you can't get around that. And the stuff that doesn't, even some of the songs that when we talked about at that last year's summer school that were written by Northerners, you can see it's a little bit of a characterization of the South. It wasn't as authentic. It's fun. That's what I like about the South. It's a great song, but it's not written by a Southerner. And you can tell by the lyrics. It was capitalizing on a feeling of a place, but not necessarily the place itself. There's a distinct difference in that. And say we had a talk on Lead Belly, right? For example, that came from somewhere. All of that blues music, or some of the bluegrass music we had, that came from somewhere. It's more authentic. So there is that authenticity that people like. And the literature and the films has to have it, even if you're not necessarily talking about the South. But, Conan, if it comes from a place, has authenticity. And you can, oh yeah, I know a guy like that. I know a person like that. It comes from a place and it's authentic. And people like authentic. They don't like fabricated nonsense. And the thing about the South and the thing about Southern culture, it's authentic. It's real. You come down to the South, you want to see Confederate monuments, you want to see, this is what people used to do. They want to see Dixie. They want to see Confederate flags. They want to hear someone with a Southern accent. They want to have some real Southern food. They don't want chain stores. They want real South. They want to be around the people that are Southern that have been here for generations. That's what they want. And of course, as they come down, you look at the Northerners moving to Charleston, all they do is change it. They bring with them the North. And then they complain. Why isn't Charleston like? They have this romantic image of it, but yet just by coming here, you can take a Yankee out of Yankee land, but you can never take the Yankee out of the person. So they come down here and they change it. They change everything to what they hated the most. It's inevitable because culture matters. So this is why Southerners bristle at people moving into the South, because they change it all. So all that said, this is what Nicole Williams is talking about in that book review. This is what Leggett's talking about here with Conan. It's what you had with the old Democrat Party or the Confederate monuments. And these are things that are important. It's tangible. It's something you can see and feel and experience a real South. That's quickly going away because of political correctness. You can't even mention it anymore. The last piece of the week was a poem by Jim Kibler in memory of Andrew Lytle. It's written, over 20 years ago, almost 25 years ago. But he sent it to me, and he said, I'd like to have this published on the website. And he says at the beginning, he wrote this, he said, the poem was written shortly after Mr. Lytle's death in 1995. I intended to be part of an expanded edition of Poems from Scorched Earth, thus continuing the meditation on fire in both its destructive and regenerative powers. And the poem is this: no longer will he stand in life before his blazing hearth, the fire of bourbon in his aged hand. No longer will the warmth of cabin flame heat up the soles of winter's pilgrim feet, or brightest talk cheer up the wayworn wanderer's heart. That fire in memory preserved must last in shadows of cold and dark diminished time, must last reflected in the gift of our own warmth that burns brighter, compensating loss. This is tradition. We still have the warmth of Lytle because we can still read Lytle. But we can no longer have the conversation. There's no longer Lytle standing in front of the hearth, but we can stand in front of the hearth with Lytle and converse and commune. When I was in Charleston last year for the summer school, I went to Calhoun's grave. And there is you go someplace like that and someone, an important person, and you can commune with them in a way. It's an experience. And I'll never forget, I'm there and I'm standing next to Calhoun's grave, and all these Yankee tourists were coming around and, oh, what's this? Who's that? Oh, that's a vice president. And they were making a lot of noise and crawling all over the thing. And, oh, what's this? There's a hole in the ground over here. I'll never forget this. It ruined the entire experience. There is something to that commune. A few years back in an Abbeville conference, a friend of mine who has written for the website, Jeff Rogers, we went to Patrick Henry's house. And, of course, Patrick Henry's grave is a reconstructed house. They had to rebuild it, burned down. But his grave was there. And they had a bluegrass festival going on at the time. So we walked out to where his grave was, and it was kind of the environment. It was cool. It's very cool out there. We're looking out over the mountains right near his house, and you have this beautiful serenade of bluegrass in the background. And you're standing with Patrick Henry, and it was a communal experience. It gave you you had this one-on-one with Henry right there. There's the man. And you had this surreal music and experience. It was amazing. And the same thing with Calhoun, and the same thing, poetry can do that. In fact, in the Renaissance period, it was thought you should read poetry every day, because that would help bring you commune with the environment and with who you are, and of course with people around you. And I think that's important. Southern poetry is a beautiful part of what makes the Southern tradition great. So, all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this week at the Abbeville Institute. Until next time, good day.